The sound echoed across the parking lot, loud enough to silence the chatter of passers-by. Elijah Carter stood frozen, his cheek burning from the sting of Lydia Parker's slap. For a moment, time seemed to stop. All eyes were on him, a black man standing in the middle of Forest Hill Plaza, humiliated and visibly shaken. Across from him, Lydia, a white woman in her 40s dressed in an immaculate business suit, stared back with fiery defiance, her hand still raised.
"You think you can just take whatever you want, don't you?"
She sneered, her voice dripping with venom. Her words cut deeper than the slap, each syllable laced with entitlement and hatred. Elijah's chest tightened as a mixture of rage and disbelief coursed through him. He had simply parked his car, an action so mundane, so harmless, yet it had spiraled into this. Lydia had stormed out of her SUV, accusing him of stealing her spot, her accusations growing louder and more venomous with each passing second. He'd tried to de-escalate, to walk away, but she wasn't having it. Her shove had come first, but this slap, it wasn't just an act of anger. It was a declaration, a message that she could strike him without consequence, as if his humanity didn't matter. For a split second, Elijah saw the crowd forming around them, phones raised, recording this spectacle. His mind raced. He knew how this looked, a black man and a white woman in a public argument. He knew the assumptions being made, the narrative already forming in their minds. He clenched his fists, willing himself to stay calm, to not give in to the fire blazing inside him. But he couldn't just take this, not today. Without thinking, Elijah's hand rose and connected with Lydia's cheek, not with the same force, but enough to stop her in her tracks. The crowd gasped, the sound of their collective shock almost as loud as the slap itself. Lydia staggered back, her eyes wide with disbelief. For a moment she seemed stunned, caught off guard by the sheer audacity of someone standing up to her.
"You hit me!"
she shrieked, her voice piercing the thick tension in the air. Her hand flew to her face, clutching her reddened cheek like she'd been gravely injured.
"You animal! You're going to regret this!"
Elijah took a step back, his heart pounding. He knew what was coming. This wasn't about the slap anymore. This was about perception, about power, about her ability to twist the truth into something that would protect her and destroy him. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, the flashing cameras of bystanders capturing the moment from every angle. Lydia turned to the onlookers, her voice rising as she pointed at Elijah. "He assaulted me. Did you see that? He hit me. Call the police." Elijah's stomach churned. This wasn't just a parking dispute anymore. This was a battle he hadn't signed up for but couldn't walk away from. What would you do if you were in Elijah's shoes? Would you fight back, knowing the risks, or let it go, even if it meant swallowing your pride? This story isn't just about a parking lot dispute. It's about courage, injustice, and standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. Join us as we uncover every shocking twist and turn of Elijah's fight for justice. This is a story that will make you think, make you feel, and make you question the world we live in. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done? If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss stories like this, stories that matter. Let's dive in. The warm afternoon sun bathed the Forest Hill Plaza parking lot in a golden glow, creating a deceptive sense of calm. Elijah Carter, his mind on the mundane task of grocery shopping, navigated through the crowded lot. His car's windows were rolled down, letting in the faint hum of distant chatter and the occasional screech of tires. As a freelance graphic designer, his schedule was flexible, but weekends were still his time to recharge, a chance to escape deadlines and client demands. Spotting an empty space near the entrance, Elijah felt a small sense of relief. Prime spots like this didn't come easy on a Saturday afternoon. Easing his car into the space, he made sure he was perfectly between the lines, a habit that reflected his meticulous nature. With his car in park and keys in hand, he stepped out into the warm breeze. That's when he heard it. The sharp screech of tires cut through the air, turning heads in the lot. Elijah glanced up, startled to see a white SUV jerking into the adjacent spot with a level of aggression that seemed disproportionate for a simple parking maneuver. Before he could process what was happening, the driver's window rolled down to reveal a woman with sharp features and a piercing glare. Her voice, loud and unapologetic, shot across the space. "Hey, that was my spot." Elijah blinked, caught off guard by the sheer force of her accusation. "Excuse me?" he replied, his tone calm but tinged with confusion. The woman, Lydia Parker, slammed her door shut and marched toward him with the kind of confidence that came from years of getting her way. Dressed in a crisp business suit, she exuded authority, but her face, twisted with anger, betrayed an ugly truth underneath. "I had my blinker on. I was waiting for that spot," she spat, stepping into his personal space. Elijah glanced around the lot, his brow furrowed. He hadn't seen her SUV when he'd pulled in. The lane had been clear, no cars, no signals, nothing to suggest someone was waiting. "Ma'am," he began, keeping his voice steady, "I didn't see you. The space was empty when I got here." Her eyes narrowed, and a bitter smile spread across her face. "Of course you didn't see me. You people never do." The words hit Elijah like a slap. You people. Two simple words, yet loaded with a lifetime of prejudice. He felt his jaw tighten as he fought the wave of anger rising in his chest. He had been here before, different faces, different places, but always the same dehumanizing undertone. "Look," he said, trying to keep his composure, "I'm just here to get some groceries. It's not worth fighting over a parking spot." But Lydia wasn't having it. She crossed her arms, her voice rising for the benefit of the gathering onlookers. "Oh, it's not about the spot anymore. It's about you thinking you can just take whatever you want. You people are all the same, entitled, disrespectful, thinking the rules don't apply to you." Elijah clenched his fists, the muscles in his arms taut. Her words weren't just about the spot. They were about him, his skin, his existence. He took a step back, hoping to create some distance, both physically and emotionally. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "I don't know what you think you're accomplishing here, but I suggest you walk away." Lydia sneered, her lips curling into a venomous grin. "Walk away? Oh no, I'm not walking away from this. You don't belong here. I bet you don't even live around here, do you?" The weight of her words pressed down on Elijah's chest. This wasn't about parking. This wasn't about rules. This was about power, her belief that she could demean and intimidate him without consequence. "Where I live has nothing to do with this," Elijah said, his voice steady but colder now. "Of course it does," Lydia shouted, her face red with fury. "This is what happens when people like you move into nice neighborhoods. You ruin everything." Elijah's vision blurred momentarily as his blood boiled. But then he caught sight of the growing crowd, their curious eyes fixed on the confrontation. He knew what they saw: a black man and a white woman in an argument. He could feel the weight of their unspoken judgments, the assumptions already forming in their minds. "Lady," he said through gritted teeth, "this isn't worth it. I'm done." He turned to walk away, determined to end the interaction before it escalated further. But then, it happened. Lydia lunged forward, shoving him hard from behind. Elijah stumbled, catching himself just before he fell to the pavement. His heart raced as he spun around to face her. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he snapped, his patience finally cracking. Lydia's chest heaved as she stepped closer, her face inches from his. "Oh, I'll tell you what's wrong. People like you thinking you can do whatever you want, thinking you can get away with it." And then came the slap. It was fast, sharp, and loud enough to echo across the parking lot. The sting spread across Elijah's cheek, but the pain wasn't just physical. It was the humiliation, the public nature of the assault, the knowledge that she had done it because she believed she could. For a moment, the world went silent. Elijah stood frozen, his mind racing. He saw the phones in the crowd, their cameras capturing the scene. He saw the smirk on Lydia's face, the satisfaction in her eyes. She thought she had won. Without thinking, Elijah raised his hand and slapped her back. It wasn't with the same force, but it was enough to wipe the smirk from her face, enough to make her stumble back in shock. The crowd gasped, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Lydia clutched her cheek, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You hit me!" she shrieked, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and indignation. "You animal! You're going to pay for this!" Elijah took a step back, his pulse pounding in his ears. He knew what this looked like. He knew what was coming. Lydia turned to the crowd, her finger jabbing in his direction. "He assaulted me. Did you see that? He hit me. Call the police." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Some pulled out their phones, recording the unfolding chaos. Others whispered among themselves, their faces a mixture of shock and judgment. Elijah's chest rose and fell with rapid breaths as he tried to process what had just happened. This wasn't about the parking spot anymore. It was about perception, power, and survival. He turned and walked toward the store, his cheek still stinging, his heart heavy. Behind him, Lydia's voice rang out, loud and shrill, as she played the victim to the growing crowd. "You're done! You hear me?" she screamed. "You're finished!" As the automatic doors of Mason Creek Market closed behind him, Elijah leaned against the shopping cart, trying to steady his shaking hands. The sting on his face was nothing compared to the turmoil in his heart. He knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The automatic doors of Mason Creek Market closed behind Elijah Carter, muffling the chaos he had left behind in the parking lot. For a moment, the cool air inside the store offered a false sense of calm. The hum of carts, soft chatter of shoppers, and faint sound of a distant intercom announcement filled the space. But for Elijah, everything felt surreal. His hands gripped the edges of the shopping cart tightly, knuckles white, as he tried to steady the storm raging inside him. His cheek still stung from Lydia Parker's slap, but it wasn't just the physical pain, it was the weight of what it represented. She hadn't slapped him because of a parking spot. That was just the excuse. No, this was about control, about entitlement, about her belief that she could treat him like less than a person and get away with it. And for a brief, agonizing moment, she had. Elijah forced himself to move down an aisle, grabbing a loaf of bread and tossing it into the cart with more force than necessary. His mind replayed the scene outside like a cruel loop, each detail sharper than the last. Lydia's venomous words, the smug way she smiled after hitting him, and the crowd's collective gasp when he slapped her back. He paused in the dairy section, staring at the rows of milk cartons, but not really seeing them. He had tried to walk away. He'd tried to de-escalate, but nothing seemed to work. People like Lydia didn't stop until they felt they had won, and he wasn't sure if walking away had even been enough. Taking a deep breath, Elijah reminded himself that he couldn't control her actions or the judgments of the crowd. He could only control his response, and he had to stay calm. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Elijah exited the store with his groceries in hand, the automatic doors sliding open to reveal the sunlit chaos of the parking lot once again. The murmurs of the crowd had faded, but the tension in the air remained. He walked toward his car, hoping for a clean break from the nightmare of the past 15 minutes. But as he approached, his heart sank. His car, once a simple, dependable sedan, was now a vandalized wreck. Long, jagged scratches ran along the side, cutting through the paint in cruel, deliberate lines. The windshield was splattered with some unknown liquid, leaving streaks that distorted the reflection of the sky above. But it was the message scrawled in black marker across his driver's side door that sent a chill down his spine. "Go back to where you came from." Elijah froze, his breath catching in his throat. For a moment he couldn't move, couldn't think. The words stared back at him like an accusation, as if the car itself had been scarred by Lydia's hatred. Slowly, he dropped the grocery bags to the ground and reached out to touch the scratches. His fingers traced the jagged lines as anger and humiliation burned through him. This wasn't just vandalism. This was personal. From the corner of his eye, Elijah caught movement. Turning his head, he spotted Lydia a few cars away, leaning casually against her SUV. Her arms were crossed,
a smug smile playing on her lips as she watched him. She didn't even try to hide it. This was her work, and she wanted him to know it. For a split second, Elijah felt an overwhelming urge to confront her. His fists clenched at his sides, and he took a step forward. But then he stopped. This was exactly what she wanted. She wanted him to lose control, to give her more ammunition to use against him. Instead, he pulled out his phone, snapping pictures of the damage. His hands shook as he documented every scratch, every insult. He knew he would need proof for the police. As he turned back to his car, Lydia called out from across the lot, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Oh no, poor you," she sneered. "Looks like someone had a bad day. Maybe next time you'll think twice before messing with me." Elijah's blood boiled, but he refused to take the bait. Ignoring her, he got into his car, gripping the steering wheel tightly as he tried to steady his breathing. He couldn't let her win. Just as Elijah prepared to back out of the parking spot, a sudden jolt shook the car. The unmistakable crunch of metal against metal rang out, sending a shockwave through his chest.
He looked up, his heart pounding, to see Lydia's SUV backing into the front of his car. She had slammed into him, deliberately, maliciously, and now she was laughing. "Are you serious?" Elijah muttered under his breath, his voice trembling with disbelief. Lydia leaned out of her window, her grin widening. "Oops! Guess I didn't see you there. My bad," she taunted before throwing her car into drive and speeding off. Elijah sat in stunned silence, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was an attack. His hands fumbled for his phone as he dialed 911. The operator's calm voice on the other end felt like a lifeline. "I'd like to report an incident," Elijah said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. "A woman just vandalized my car and hit it with her SUV before driving off. I'm following her now." The operator asked for details, and Elijah quickly described Lydia's vehicle and their location. As he followed her at a safe distance, he couldn't help but feel the weight of every choice he had made that day. He hadn't asked for this confrontation. He hadn't provoked her. But now, he was in the middle of a battle he never wanted to fight. A few minutes later, flashing red and blue lights appeared ahead, and Elijah let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The police had intercepted Lydia at a red light. Her SUV was pulled over to the side of the road, and Elijah parked a short distance behind her, still gripping his steering wheel tightly. As he stepped out of his car, he saw Lydia waving her arms dramatically, already shouting at the officers. Her voice was shrill and frantic, as though she were the one in danger. "He attacked me," she screamed, pointing in Elijah's direction. "He's dangerous. Arrest him." Elijah's stomach churned as he approached, his hands raised slightly to show he wasn't a threat. One of the officers, a tall man with a calm demeanor, turned to him. "Sir, can you explain what happened here?" the officer asked. Elijah took a deep breath, his voice steady but firm. "This woman vandalized my car in the parking lot and then hit it with her SUV before driving off. I have photos of the damage and witnesses who saw what happened." Lydia cut him off, her voice dripping with outrage. "He's lying. He hit me first, and now he's trying to blame me. I was just defending myself." The officer raised a hand to silence her, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. "We'll need to see the evidence," he said. Elijah pulled out his phone, showing the officer the photos of the scratches, the hateful message, and the fresh damage from Lydia's SUV. The officer's expression hardened as he studied the images. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Lydia, "we're going to need you to step out of the vehicle." Lydia's face turned red, and she slammed her fists against the steering wheel. "Are you kidding me? This is insane. You're taking his side?" "Step out of the vehicle," the officer repeated, his tone firm. As Lydia reluctantly exited her SUV, Elijah felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time that day, it seemed like justice might be on his side. But he knew this was far from over. The tension in the air was so thick, it felt almost tangible. As Lydia Parker stood by her SUV, her voice echoing with outrage, Elijah Carter watched the officers exchange glances. They were calm, professional, but their body language suggested they were piecing the story together, weighing every detail.
The growing crowd along the street whispered among themselves, some clutching their phones, recording every second. Lydia's voice, shrill and indignant, cut through the murmur of onlookers. "This is absurd. I'm the victim here. He threatened me. He assaulted me. And now you're taking his side. Unbelievable." Elijah stood his ground, his heart pounding but his face impassive. He knew the truth was on his side, but the familiar knot in his stomach warned him not to get comfortable. He'd seen situations like this before, how quickly perception could twist against someone like him, how easily his actions could be misconstrued. One of the officers, Detective Mason Grant, a tall man with sharp features and an air of quiet authority, approached Elijah. His calm demeanor felt like the only thing tethering the moment to reality. "Sir," Grant said, his voice steady but direct, "do you have any witnesses who can corroborate your account?" Elijah nodded, pulling out his phone. "I don't know anyone here, but there were plenty of people in the parking lot when she vandalized my car. Someone must have seen something, or recorded it." Grant's eyes narrowed slightly as he scanned the small crowd. Then, as if on cue, a woman in her late 30s stepped forward hesitantly.
I saw what happened," she said, her voice shaky but resolute. Her gaze darted between Elijah and Lydia before settling on the detective. "She was yelling at him, and then she hit his car with her SUV on purpose. And before that, she scratched his car. I saw it all." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, and Lydia's face twisted with fury. "Are you kidding me? You're taking his side too. You don't even know him." The woman flinched slightly but stood her ground. "I don't need to know him to know what I saw," she replied, her voice firmer now. "You were the one who started all this." Detective Grant gave a brief nod. "Thank you, ma'am. Would you mind providing a formal statement?" The woman agreed, and another officer escorted her to the side to take her details. Lydia's indignation escalated into full-blown panic. "This is insane. You're all against me. Do you even know who I am? I'll have your jobs for this." Grant didn't flinch. "Ma'am," he said, his tone firmer now, "we need you to calm down and cooperate." But Lydia wasn't finished. She turned her venom back toward Elijah. "You think you've won, don't you?" she spat, her voice trembling with rage. "You think this is over? I'll ruin you. People like you don't get to win. Not against me." The words hit Elijah like a punch to the gut. He wanted to respond, to call her out for her blatant hatred, but he knew better. She was trying to provoke him, to push him into making a mistake. Instead, he looked her in the eye and said nothing. Detective Grant motioned for another officer to escort Lydia back to her vehicle while he returned to Elijah. "We've got enough to move forward," Grant said, his voice low but steady. "With the witness statement, the photos, and the damage to your car, it's clear this wasn't an accident. You'll need to file a formal report, but we're going to take her in for property damage and reckless endangerment." Elijah exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. Grant nodded. "This isn't over, though. She's going to push back hard, and these things can get messy. Are you ready for that?" Elijah hesitated, the reality of the situation settling in. He hadn't asked for this fight, but now he was in it, whether he liked it or not. "I'll do what I have to," he said finally. Lydia's voice broke through the tension once more as she was led toward the police cruiser. "You're making a big mistake," she screamed, her tone desperate now. "You'll regret this. All of you." The officers ignored her protests as they guided her into the back seat of the car. As the door slammed shut, her muffled shouts faded into the background. For a moment, the street was quiet. The crowd began to disperse, their curiosity satisfied, but Elijah remained rooted to the spot. The adrenaline that had kept him going was starting to wear off, leaving him drained and emotionally raw. Grant placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of solidarity. "Get your report filed and we'll handle the rest," he said. "And if you need anything, don't hesitate to call." Elijah nodded, watching as the police car pulled away, its lights flashing in the distance. He knew this wasn't the end. Lydia wasn't the type to back down, and the fight ahead would be exhausting. But for the first time that day, he felt a glimmer of hope. He returned to his car, the vandalism still glaring back at him like a physical representation of Lydia's hatred. As he sat behind the wheel, he took a deep breath and stared at his reflection in the rearview mirror. His face was tired, his cheek still slightly red from the slap, but his resolve was unshaken. This wasn't just about a parking lot dispute anymore. This was about standing up for himself, about showing people like Lydia that they couldn't treat others this way and walk away unscathed. Turning the key in the ignition, Elijah drove toward the police station. The road ahead was long, and the battle wasn't over. But he wasn't going to let fear or hatred win. The fluorescent lights of the police station cast a harsh glow over Elijah Carter as he sat at a plain metal desk, filling out the report. The room smelled faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant, the quiet punctuated by the occasional ring of a phone or shuffle of papers. It was a strange contrast to the chaos he had just endured. Here, everything felt controlled, procedural, yet he couldn't shake the heaviness in his chest. Detective Mason Grant sat across from him, reviewing the witness statement and photos Elijah had provided. His expression was calm, measured, but there was an unmistakable glint of determination in his eyes. "You've done everything right so far," Grant said, sliding the photos back toward Elijah. "The evidence you've collected is strong, and with the witness backing you up, we have a solid case against her." Elijah nodded, his fingers tightening around the edge of the desk. "It's not just about the car," he said quietly. "It's about the way she looked at me, the things she said. She didn't just want to win some argument. She wanted to break me." Grant leaned back slightly, his gaze steady. People like her rely on intimidation. They think their words and actions won't have consequences because, for too long, they haven't. But that changes when someone like you stands up to them. The words offered a small measure of comfort, but Elijah still felt the weight of the day pressing down on him. He thought of the hateful message scrawled across his car, the crowd of onlookers with their phones raised, and the smug satisfaction on Lydia Parker's face as she taunted him. Even with her in custody, he couldn't escape the feeling that this fight wasn't over. Grant seemed to sense his unease. "She'll be processed and charged tonight," he said. "And from here, the case will go to the district attorney. I'll make sure everything we've gathered is forwarded to them. You'll need to decide if you want to press charges formally." Elijah hesitated, the enormity of the decision settling over him. "I don't want this to turn into something worse," he admitted. "She's already tried to twist the story, make herself the victim. What if people believe her?" Grant's voice was firm but reassuring. "You have the truth on your side, Elijah. That's more powerful than you think, and you're not alone in this." Elijah nodded slowly, drawing strength from the detective's words. He wasn't sure what the road ahead would look like, but he knew he couldn't back down now. As he stood to leave, Grant handed him a card. "If anything else happens, call me directly, and if you need support, there are people who can help." Elijah took the card, slipping it into his pocket. "Thanks," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. The following days were a blur of emotions for Elijah. News of the incident had spread quickly, fueled by videos uploaded to social media. The footage showed the confrontation in the parking lot, the slap, and Lydia's dramatic accusations. Predictably, the internet exploded with opinions. Some people rallied behind Elijah, condemning Lydia's actions and praising his restraint. Others, however, twisted the narrative, painting Elijah as the aggressor. It was exhausting to see his life dissected by strangers who knew nothing about him. Despite the chaos online, Elijah tried to focus on his work. Sitting in his small apartment, surrounded by sketches and design projects, he poured his emotions into his art. Each stroke of his pen felt cathartic, a way to channel the anger and frustration that had been building inside him. But the peace didn't last long. One evening, as Elijah sat on his couch scrolling through news articles about the case, his phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Mr. Carter?" a woman's voice said on the other end. "Yes," Elijah replied cautiously. "This is Sophia Bennett, the prosecutor assigned to your case. I'd like to meet with you to discuss the next steps." Elijah agreed, and the next morning he found himself sitting across from Sophia in a small conference room at the district attorney's office. She was sharp, confident, and carried an air of authority that immediately put him at ease. "First, let me say I admire your courage," Sophia began, her tone direct but empathetic. "Standing up to someone like Lydia Parker isn't easy, especially when they use every tool at their disposal to twist the truth." Elijah felt a flicker of relief. For the first time since the incident, he felt like someone truly understood what he was up against. Sophia laid out the case in clear, concise terms. "We have enough evidence to pursue charges for property damage, reckless endangerment, and assault, but I need to prepare you for what comes next. Lydia isn't going to admit guilt easily. She'll fight this, and she'll use every tactic she can to paint herself as the victim." Elijah nodded. "I've seen what she's capable of. She's already tried to make it look like I attacked her." Sophia's eyes hardened. "And that's exactly why we need to be thorough. The truth is on your side, but public perception can be tricky. If you're willing to see this through, I'll do everything in my power to make sure justice is served." Elijah met her gaze, his resolve strengthening. "I'm not backing down," he said firmly. Over the next few weeks, preparations for the case intensified. Sophia and her team worked tirelessly, gathering witness statements, compiling evidence, and crafting a narrative that would expose Lydia's lies. Meanwhile, Elijah struggled to navigate the fallout in his personal life. Friends and family reached out to offer support, but the constant buzz of social media and news coverage was overwhelming. Everywhere he turned, there were reminders of the incident, the hateful comments, the arguments between strangers online, the endless cycle of opinions and judgments. One night, unable to sleep, Elijah scrolled through the videos again. He paused on a clip of Lydia screaming at the officers as they led her away. Her words were laced with venom, but what struck him most was the sheer audacity of her entitlement. "You'll regret this," she had shouted, her voice shrill with rage. "I'll ruin you." Elijah clenched his jaw, the memory reigniting his determination. He wouldn't let her win. Not this time. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived, and Elijah found himself walking into the courthouse alongside Sophia. The building loomed tall and imposing, its marble facade reflecting the early morning sun. Inside, the air buzzed with a mixture of tension and anticipation. Lydia was already there, seated at the defense table with her lawyer. Her expression was a mask of defiance, but Elijah noticed the slight twitch in her jaw, the way her fingers drummed nervously against the table. As the proceedings began, Sophia presented the evidence with precision and clarity. She laid out the facts, the photos of the vandalism, the witness statement, the video footage. Each piece built upon the last, painting a damning picture of Lydia's actions. When it was the defense's turn, Lydia's lawyer attempted to shift the blame, arguing that she had acted out of fear and frustration. But their arguments felt hollow, grasping at straws. Elijah sat silently, his hands clasped tightly in his lap as he listened. He knew this was just the beginning, but seeing Lydia squirm under the weight of the evidence brought a small sense of vindication. As the hearing concluded, the judge ruled that there was enough evidence to proceed to trial. Lydia's composure cracked for the first time, her face pale as the reality of the situation settled in. Outside the courthouse, Sophia turned to Elijah with a determined smile. "We're one step closer," she said. Elijah nodded, his resolve unwavering. He had come this far, and he wouldn't stop now. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the trial began in earnest. Elijah Carter sat at the plaintiff's table next to Sophia Bennett, his nerves raw, but his resolve unshaken. Across the aisle, Lydia Parker sat stiffly, her chin tilted upward in defiance. Her lawyer whispered something to her, but she barely acknowledged him, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Judge Patricia Simmons, a stern yet fair presence, took her seat at the bench. She wasted no time calling the court to order, her gavel striking like a thunderclap. Sophia leaned toward Elijah, her voice low but reassuring. "Stay calm. Stay focused. We've got this." Elijah nodded, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. He glanced toward the jury, their faces neutral but attentive. This was it, the moment he had both dreaded and prepared for. Sophia stood to deliver her opening statement. Her words were clear, confident, and deliberate, each one driving home the gravity of Lydia's actions. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Sophia began, her tone measured yet passionate. "This case is not just about a parking lot dispute. It's about accountability. It's about ensuring that actions, no matter who commits them, have consequences. The evidence will show that the defendant, Lydia Parker, acted with malice, targeting Elijah Carter not only with her words but with her actions that escalated to physical harm and damage to his property. This isn't just about vandalism or reckless driving. This is about the defendant using her position and her privilege to dehumanize and intimidate." The jury's eyes were fixed on Sophia as she outlined the evidence they would see: the photos, the witness testimonies, and the video footage. When it was the defense's turn, Lydia's lawyer rose with a calm smile that seemed rehearsed. His tone was softer, almost pleading. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we understand that the events in question have stirred emotions. However, we urge you to remember that my client is a person, a mother, a community leader, who had a moment of frustration, a moment where emotions got the better of her. But that doesn't make her a criminal. What you'll see today is not malice, but misunderstanding." Elijah's jaw tightened as he listened. Misunderstanding. The scratches on his car, the hateful words, the intentional collision, none of it felt like a misunderstanding. The trial unfolded with a rhythm that was both predictable and grueling. Witnesses were called to the stand, their testimonies painting a vivid picture of the events that had transpired. The first witness, a middle-aged man who had been in the parking lot that day, described Lydia's actions with unflinching honesty. "She was shouting at him," the man said, his voice steady, "calling him names, accusing him of things that didn't make sense, and then she keyed his car. It wasn't an accident. She did it on purpose." Sophia pressed for details, her questions sharp and precise. "Did you see Mr. Carter provoke her in any way?" The man shook his head. "Number." He was calm. He tried to walk away, but she kept going. When it was the defense's turn to cross-examine, Lydia's lawyer tried to sow doubt. "Are you absolutely certain of what you saw?" he asked. "Is it possible that you misunderstood the situation, that perhaps Ms. Parker felt threatened and acted out of fear?" The witness didn't flinch. "I know what I saw. She wasn't scared. She was angry. There's a difference." The second witness was the woman who had stepped forward at the scene. She recounted the collision, her voice trembling slightly but growing stronger with each word. "She backed into his car on purpose," the woman said, her gaze flickering briefly to Lydia before returning to Sophia. She laughed afterward like it was a joke. The defense again tried to twist her words, but Sophia's redirection was swift and cutting. "Thank you for your bravery in speaking the truth," Sophia said, her eyes locking with the witnesses. The most damning piece of evidence came when the video footage was presented. The courtroom was silent as the grainy footage played on a large screen, showing Lydia keying Elijah's car, her face contorted with rage. Gasps rippled through the room when the video cut to her backing into his car, her smug laughter audible even through the poor quality of the recording. Lydia's composure cracked for the first time. Her face turned pale, and she avoided eye contact with anyone in the room. As the trial progressed, Lydia was called to the stand. Her lawyer guided her through a rehearsed narrative, painting her as a stressed, overwhelmed woman who had made a mistake in the heat of the moment. "I was scared," Lydia said, her voice trembling just enough to seem believable. "I thought he was going to hurt me. I didn't mean to vandalize his car or hit it. It was just, I wasn't thinking straight. Sophia stood for the cross-examination, her expression calm but unyielding. Ms. Parker, she began, her tone measured, you claim you acted out of fear. Can you explain why, then, you were seen laughing after colliding with Mr. Carter's car? Lydia shifted in her seat, her confidence wavering. I don't know. Maybe it was nervous laughter. Sophia didn't relent. And the words you wrote on his car? Go back to where you came from. Was that nervous too? Lydia's face flushed and she stammered. I wasn't myself that day. Sophia's voice grew sharper, each word landing like a hammer. You weren't yourself? Or were you finally showing exactly who you are? The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as Lydia struggled to respond. Sophia let the silence hang for a moment before turning to the jury. No further questions. The trial's closing arguments were a study in contrasts. Sophia's words were powerful, weaving the facts into a compelling narrative that highlighted the harm Lydia had caused, not just to Elijah, but to the community. This case isn't just about property damage or reckless behavior, she said. It's about standing up to hate, about saying enough is enough. Elijah Carter didn't provoke this. He didn't escalate it. He stood there and took the worst of what Ms. Parker had to offer, and he still chose to pursue justice the right way. That's what this case is about. Lydia's lawyer appealed to emotion, asking the jury to see her as a flawed but good person who had made a mistake. But as the jury filed out to deliberate, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Elijah sat quietly, his hands clasped tightly as he waited. Sophia placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Whatever happens, you did the right thing. When the jury returned, the foreperson stood and read the verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Lydia Parker, guilty on all charges. The words hit Elijah like a wave of relief. Lydia slumped in her seat, her defiance replaced with shock. The judge announced her sentence: probation, mandatory community service, and restitution for the damages she had caused. As the gavel struck, signaling the end of the trial, Elijah felt a weight lift from his shoulders. This wasn't just his victory. It was a stand against the entitlement and hatred that people like Lydia had wielded for too long. Walking out of the courthouse, Elijah took a deep breath, the crisp air filling his lungs. Sophia walked beside him, her expression one of quiet pride. You did it, she said. No, Elijah replied, his voice steady. We did it. When his name was announced, the audience erupted into applause. Elijah stepped onto the stage, his heart pounding, but the warmth of their reception steadied him. He began to speak, his voice shaky at first but growing stronger with each word. When I walked into a grocery store parking lot a few months ago, I had no idea my life was about to change forever, he said. What started as a simple trip for groceries turned into a confrontation that forced me to stand up for myself in a way I never imagined. It was painful, it was exhausting, but it was necessary. The room was silent, every eye fixed on him. Elijah took a deep breath and continued. I didn't ask to be in that situation. None of us ask for the injustices we face. But what I've learned is that when those moments find us, we have a choice. We can either let them define us, or we can rise above them and demand better, not just for ourselves, but for everyone. He spoke about the trial, about the support he had received, and the hateful messages he had endured. He shared Marcus's story and how it had reminded him that even small actions could make a big difference. By the time he finished, the room was on its feet, the applause thunderous. Elijah felt a swell of emotion he couldn't quite put into words. For the first time, he understood what Sophia had meant. His story wasn't just his own anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt silenced, dismissed, or diminished. After the event, people approached Elijah to thank him, their faces glowing with gratitude and hope. One woman, her voice trembling with emotion, said, "Your story gave me the strength to leave an abusive relationship. I finally realized I deserved better." A young boy clutched his mother's hand as he shyly handed Elijah a drawing he had made. A picture of a man standing tall, surrounded by rays of light. "You're a superhero," the boy said softly. Elijah knelt to meet the boy's gaze, his heart full. "Thank you," he said. "But you know what? You're a superhero too. Never forget that." As the crowd began to thin, Elijah stood alone for a moment, looking out at the now empty chairs. He thought about how far he had come since that fateful day in the parking lot. The journey hadn't been easy, and it wasn't over, but he felt stronger now, more certain of his place in the world and the power of his voice. Elijah walked out into the crisp night air, the stars overhead twinkling like quiet witnesses to his journey. He knew there would be more battles ahead, more moments of doubt and struggle, but for now, he felt a sense of peace, knowing that he had turned his pain into something meaningful, and that, he realized, was the ultimate victory. Months after the trial, Elijah Carter found himself navigating a new normal. While the courtroom battle had ended, the ripple effects continued to shape his life. His story had become a symbol for standing up against hate and injustice, inspiring countless others, but also attracting relentless scrutiny. Elijah sat at his desk one evening, staring at an overflowing inbox. Requests for interviews, speaking engagements, and collaborations with advocacy groups poured in daily. His story had touched so many lives, but the weight of responsibility often felt overwhelming. For every message of gratitude and support, there was another filled with vitriol, questioning his motives or attacking his character. One message stopped him cold. "I see you're still playing the victim. When are you going to admit you were just as wrong?" Elijah's hand hovered over the keyboard, tempted to respond. He wanted to explain, to defend himself, but he knew it would only fuel the negativity. With a deep breath, he closed the email and reached for his sketchpad instead. Art had always been his sanctuary, a place where he could process emotions too tangled for words. Tonight, he needed it more than ever. A week later, Elijah received an invitation to speak at a local community event. At first, he hesitated. Public speaking wasn't something he had ever sought out, and the idea of standing in front of a crowd filled him with anxiety. But as he thought about the messages he'd received, the people who had drawn strength from his story, he realized he couldn't turn it down. The night of the event, Elijah stood backstage, the hum of the audience filtering through the curtain. His palms were damp, his heart pounding. Sophia Bennett, who had remained a steadfast ally, appeared beside him, her presence steadying. "You're going to do great," she said with a small smile. Elijah nodded, her encouragement giving him the push he needed. When his name was announced, the audience erupted in applause. Elijah stepped onto the stage, his nerves raw but his voice steady as he began to speak. "I didn't ask for any of this," he said, his gaze sweeping over the room. "All I wanted that day was to park my car and buy some groceries. But what happened in that parking lot forced me to make a choice, to stand up for myself or let hate go unchecked." The room fell silent, every face turned toward him, hanging on his words. "Standing up wasn't easy," Elijah continued. "It brought fear, pain, and a lot of anger. But it also brought something else, the realization that we can't let hate win, not in the small moments, not in the big ones, because every time we stand up, we show others that they can too." He shared the story of Marcus, the young man who had found the courage to confront his own struggles after hearing about Elijah's trial. He spoke about the power of resilience, the importance of community, and the hope that even in the darkest times, change was possible. When he finished, the audience rose to their feet, the applause echoing in his ears like a wave of affirmation. Elijah stepped off the stage, feeling lighter than he had in months. Later that night, Elijah visited the park near his apartment, where a mural he had designed was being painted. The mural depicted a figure standing tall against a stormy backdrop, beams of light breaking through the clouds. Around the figure, others were rising, their hands linked in solidarity. Watching the artists bring his vision to life, Elijah felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was what he wanted his story to be, a reminder that even in the face of hate, there was strength in unity, power in standing together. As he stood there, a young woman approached him hesitantly. "Are you Elijah Carter?" she asked softly. He nodded, offering a small smile. "That's me." Her eyes welled with tears. "I just wanted to say thank you. Your story gave me the courage to leave a toxic situation. I finally feel free." Elijah's throat tightened. "I'm so proud of you," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "You deserve freedom and happiness. Never forget that." The woman smiled through her tears, her gratitude palpable. As she walked away, Elijah turned back to the mural, his heart full. He knew his journey wasn't over. There would always be challenges, moments of doubt, and people like Lydia Parker who tried to diminish others. But standing there, beneath the light of the mural, Elijah felt a quiet certainty. He had turned his pain into purpose, his struggle into strength, and that was enough. The soft glow of the evening sun bathed Elijah Carter's apartment in warm light as he sat by the window, sipping a cup of tea. Outside, the city moved with its usual rhythm, cars honking, people chatting on sidewalks, life moving forward. Elijah watched it all with a quiet sense of reflection. The months since the trial had been transformative in ways he never could have imagined. He had started as an ordinary man confronting an extraordinary injustice, but now he was part of something much larger. The mural in the park had become a focal point for the community. People from all walks of life came to see it, to reflect on its message of resilience and unity. Children played beneath its colours, couples took pictures in front of it, and families paused to explain its significance to their kids. Elijah often visited the mural, finding solace in its presence and the hope it inspired. One crisp morning, Elijah returned to the park to find a group of students gathered near the mural. A teacher was explaining its story, pointing to the figure standing tall amidst the storm and the surrounding silhouettes rising in solidarity. "Mr. Carter," the teacher said, noticing Elijah's approach. "I didn't expect to see you here." The students turned, their faces lighting up with recognition. Elijah smiled, his heart swelling at their excitement. One boy, no older than 10, stepped forward. "Are you the guy who stood up to that mean lady?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. Elijah knelt to meet the boy's gaze. "I am," he said. "But it wasn't just about standing up to her. It was about standing up for what's right, for myself and for others." The boy nodded solemnly, as if absorbing a lesson he would carry with him forever. "I want to be brave like you," he said softly. Elijah placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You already are," he said. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means doing the right thing even when it's hard." As the students continued to explore the mural, Elijah stood back, his chest tightening with emotion. This was the impact he had hoped for, not just inspiring others to stand up, but planting seeds of courage and empathy in the next generation. Later that evening, Elijah found himself back at his apartment, sorting through sketches for his next project. His phone buzzed with a call from Marcus, the young man whose life had been profoundly affected by Elijah's story. Elijah sat at his desk one evening, staring at an overflowing inbox. Requests for interviews, speaking engagements, and collaborations with advocacy groups poured in daily. His story had touched so many lives, but the weight of responsibility often felt overwhelming. For every message of gratitude and support, there was another filled with vitriol, questioning his motives or attacking his character. One message stopped him cold. "I see you're still playing the victim. When are you going to admit you were just as wrong?" Elijah's hand hovered over the keyboard, tempted to respond. He wanted to explain, to defend himself, but he knew it would only fuel the negativity. With a deep breath, he closed the email and reached for his sketchpad instead. Art had always been his sanctuary, a place where he could process emotions too tangled for words. Tonight, he needed it more than ever. A week later, Elijah received an invitation to speak at a local community event. At first, he hesitated. Public speaking wasn't something he had ever sought out, and the idea of standing in front of a crowd filled him with anxiety. But as he thought about the messages he'd received, the people who had drawn strength from his story, he realized he couldn't turn it down. The night of the event, Elijah stood backstage, the hum of the audience filtering through the curtain. His palms were damp, his heart pounding. Sophia Bennett, who had remained a steadfast ally, appeared beside him, her presence steadying. "You're going to do great," she said with a small smile. Elijah nodded, her encouragement giving him the push he needed. When his name was announced, the audience erupted in applause. Elijah stepped onto the stage, his nerves raw but his voice steady as he began to speak. "Hey, Mr. Carter," Marcus said, his voice filled with excitement. "I just wanted to let you know, I gave my first speech today. It was for a school project about people who inspire us. I talked about you." Elijah chuckled, his voice warm. "Marcus, that's incredible. How did it go?" "Really well," Marcus replied. "I was nervous, but I kept thinking about what you said, that standing up is about more than just yourself. Everyone clapped, and my teacher said I did great." Elijah felt a lump form in his throat. "I'm so proud of you," he said. "You're making a difference, Marcus. Don't ever forget that." After the call ended, Elijah sat in quiet reflection. Marcus's courage, the students at the mural, the countless messages of support, all of it reminded him why he had chosen to speak out. His fight for justice had become a beacon for others, a way to amplify voices that had been silenced for too long. As the days turned into weeks, Elijah found peace in the small moments, watching the mural grow into a symbol for the community, connecting with people who shared their stories, and pouring his heart into his art. He began a new series of works, each piece exploring themes of identity, resilience, and the power of collective action. One evening, as he added the final strokes to a painting, his phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from a national art gallery, expressing interest in featuring his work in an upcoming exhibit focused on social justice. Elijah stared at the email, his heart racing. This was the kind of opportunity he had only dreamed of, a chance to share his message on an even larger stage. But more than that, it was validation, that his story, his pain, and his resilience had meaning far beyond the courtroom. The night of the exhibit's opening, Elijah stood in the gallery, surrounded by his artwork and a crowd of supporters. Sophia was there, her smile as steadying as ever, along with Marcus and others who had been inspired by his journey. As Elijah spoke to the crowd, his voice filled with gratitude and determination. "Art has always been a way for me to make sense of the world," he said. "It allows us to connect, to empathize, to see beyond our own experiences. My hope is that these pieces remind us all of the power we hold to create change, not just for ourselves, but for each other." The applause that followed was deafening, but Elijah's focus remained on the faces in the crowd. He saw hope, resolve, and a shared commitment to building a better world. Later that night, Elijah returned to the park, the crisp air carrying the faint sounds of the city. He stood before the mural, its vibrant colors illuminated by the soft glow of nearby streetlights. For a long moment, he simply stared, letting the quiet wash over him. His journey hadn't been easy. It had been filled with pain, doubt, and moments when giving up seemed like the simpler choice. But standing there, surrounded by the echoes of his story and the lives it had touched, Elijah felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He knew there would always be challenges ahead, battles to fight, and voices to lift. But he also knew that he was ready. Taking a deep breath, Elijah turned toward the horizon, his steps steady and sure. The storm that had once threatened to break him had become the foundation for something stronger, a life rooted in purpose, resilience, and the unwavering belief that even in the darkest moments, there is light to be found. And with that, he walked forward, ready to face whatever came next. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and open the mind. Until next time, remember, every story has the power to make a difference, yours included.